If you're coming in, continue to say hello in the chat, where you're calling from, and drop in a word you would use to describe feedback. Now, before I ask you all to register, or part of the registration process was to answer this question. And a lot of you gave me some great insight into the challenges that you've been experiencing. Some of the themes that I kept hearing over and over again were around conflict, a fear of conflict, wanting to avoid conflict. It's hard not to take feedback personally when we're receiving it ourselves or when we're giving it to other people. So that defensiveness that happens, the emotional management, those were other things that people had mentioned are challenges for them. Being consistent, the timing of it, balancing directness. So making sure that I'm not too harsh, but I'm not too vague. Making sure that the feedback I'm giving is constructive, that the receiver trusts me, that there's credibility, that I have the right tone, that I'm delivering it in a way that is helpful and that the other person is going to receive it well. So, in our conversation today, I'm going to provide you with a variety of tips and strategies related to feedback. And the intent isn't to try to do this all at once. Focus in on what you think will have the biggest impact on minimizing your biggest challenge. So, again, don't focus on trying to do all of this. Think about your challenge and focus on what you think is going to minimize that. Now, you shared challenges with me. This is important for knowing what blocker you need to address, but it's also helpful to have a vision for the future. What do you want a positive culture of feedback to look like? How will it benefit your team, your organization? What results will you see? So I'd love to hear in the chat, what do you want your culture of feedback to look like on your team or in your organization? Go ahead and start writing out descriptors in the chat. What does that ideal culture of feedback look like to you? Go ahead and describe it. Encouraging, actionable, safe place to share. Timely, rooted in trust, yes. Receptive, frequent, kind, two-way, ongoing. Love it. These are great. Open, transparent, well-intended, action-focused. Such great descriptors and great words. Brave, intentional, a gift. Love it. Assuming the best of each other. Yes, thank you, Peter. It's just a habit. It's not a surprise or one-off to receive feedback. Love that. Yes, it's helpful for us to have that vision of what we want as well, in addition to understanding what our blockers are. Now, for those that don't know me, my name is Jen Rekla. I've worked in leadership for almost 15 years in healthcare, nonprofit, public sector spaces. And for the last 13 years, I've worked in the learning and organizational development space with a particular focus on leadership development. I currently have my own practice. I'm a leadership coach, trainer, and consultant. And feedback, it is one of those topics that comes up with every individual, every team, every organization that I work with. That's the more formal side of me. This is the more informal side of me. My top two values are fun and adventure. I try not to take myself too seriously. Absolutely love the outdoors, love spending time with my family in the outdoors. If you ever come to my house, you will notice giraffes everywhere. I've loved them since I was a kid. And I very much believe in a strengths-based approach to philosophy, but a strengths-based philosophy to work and to life. So I have, you shared some descriptors for your ideal organization. Some of them are similar words that you see on the screen in front of you as well. And I've been working with an executive team recently for the last couple of years, and their focus is really around this culture of feedback, this positive culture of feedback in their organization. And this is what they've come up with as a description of their ideal. It's growth oriented, it's integrated, it's part of the flow of work, it's received productively, it's timely, it's actionable. We're delivering it with high emotional intelligence. And I'm sharing this with you in case the picture of your ideal isn't clear yet. Use this because I think that it encompasses almost everything I would want to see in a positive feedback culture. This is what we should all be striving for. And I love the additional words that everybody had as well. So thank you for sharing those. There are a lot of results that are tied to effective feedback. This is actually a former team that I used to lead in my last organization. And we worked really hard. In the 5 years that I was there, we did a lot of work around feedback, improving our skills on the team, and ensuring that we had the right environment to be able to consistently give feedback to each other. And we not only saw metrics around trust and engagement increase within our internal team, but this also had a positive impact on our key performance indicators for the organization. So, engagement with professional development opportunities. This was a learning and development team, and we measured engagement across the organization with what we were offering. That increased. Satisfaction with our learning programming increased. The amount of individuals that were participating electively in our programming increased. So we saw those key performance indicators, and all of those results very meaningful, very helpful. But there's a particular story, a moment in time where I realized, oh, we made it. We finally have gotten to a really good point where we've created this positive culture of feedback among the team. And I remember it probably was 2 years maybe ago, a year and a half ago. We're in this team meeting. Some of us are virtual, some of us are in person. And one of the team members was giving an update on a project. And I remember asking a question. I asked a question to this individual, and one of the other teammates turned to me and said, "Oh, Jen, that was harsh." And I thought, oh no, that was not my intent. In that moment, I looked to the person that had given the update and said, "Hey, was that really harsh?" And they said, "Yeah, kind of." And I apologized immediately, redirected my intent, redirected my question, and we were able to have a productive conversation. And I thanked the person that called me in and said, "Hey, that was kind of harsh." That was that moment where I said, you know what? We have gotten to such a good place where in the moment we can give each other this real feedback. People are not getting upset about it. If we hadn't gotten to that point, can you imagine the back conversations that would have happened after the meeting? How unproductive that would have been. She probably never would have said something to me. So that's what I want to get you to. I want to get you to a point where people can openly share feedback with each other. Now, it would be irresponsible for me to pass along all these practical strategies that I'm about to share with you without also addressing the importance of mindset in all of this work. Mindset is the foundation. They are the lens with which we see the world. They're heavily influenced by our past experiences. And it's those experiences that shape our thoughts, shape our beliefs, shape our attitudes. And it's that mindset, that perception of the world that really drives our emotions, it drives our behavior, it drives our actions, and it drives our results. So it's really important that when we are stepping into this feedback work, that we're also leaning into a growth mindset. Now, I know for a lot of us, this isn't a new term. We've heard of a growth mindset before. It's something that I highly recommend reading Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, about this and all of the research behind this. The crux of a growth mindset is that we believe failures and challenges are opportunities and possibilities. So, leaning into a growth mindset, we are saying feedback is helpful. Feedback is what's going to help us grow. Challenges are opportunities for us to continuously improve. I like to try new things. I am inspired by the success of others. These are things and beliefs that people have when they lean into a growth mindset space. And so before you embark on this work, strengthening these feedback skills also means strengthening a growth mindset in yourself, in your teams, and your organizations. So asking yourself this question is really important. What does a growth mindset look like for me individually? What does it look like for us as a team? And if you're thinking larger about the organization, what does it look like for us as an organization? Leaning into a growth mindset, that belief that failures and challenges are opportunities, possibilities for continuous growth and continuous improvement, that's going to make the next steps that I'm about to share with you more sustainable. So before I start going into these actionable steps that I want to share with you, I just want to pause to see if there's questions from anyone about anything that I've gone over so far. You can go ahead and post those questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and share out loud. Oh, and thank you, Kathleen, for those kind words. I really, really appreciate that. Okay, well, as we go through this, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to plop them into the chat. I'll take some pauses throughout to ensure that I'm addressing any questions that you have. All right, let's talk about some specific actions you can take to recognize your team in ways that resonate, that are meaningful, give constructive feedback that drives growth and continuous improvement, and receive feedback with grace and confidence. So, digging into this recognition piece, the first component of creating that positive culture of feedback, I'm going to share a little story. So, this is actually a picture of a postcard thank you note that I got several years back. I still have it up on my bulletin board over here. I think I got this maybe 7 or 8 years ago. It was from someone on my team. It was the first month that we were working together. And Wonder Woman is my favorite superhero. It was one of the first costumes I remember as a kid when I was 4 years old. So the card had a lot of meaning to me, especially because I just love Wonder Woman so much. And then on the back of the card, she was so specific with the value in appreciating me and recognizing me. She gave me specific examples. It is something that was extremely meaningful for me. Didn't take her a lot of time, didn't cost a lot of money, and it's something that stuck with me for years. So there's this framework that I really like using. I've used this framework for the last probably more than a decade. I learned about it when I worked at a hospital many, many years back. And it's SMART. So it's an acronym a lot of us are already familiar with goals. Slightly different than the SMART model for goals. So the first part of this acronym starts with sincere, ensuring that our recognition is sincere, that it is a reflection of genuine appreciation. If we are not sincere with our feedback, it's going to come off that way. So we have to make sure that it's genuine appreciation. It's meaningful. And when I'm talking about meaningful, that it is tied to your organization's mission, vision, values, if there's certain goals that you have on your team or goals that the individual has. So it's tied to that. When employees are able to see that their actions support one of these driving principles, they're motivated to repeat that behavior again and again. So it's really important that we focus on tying it to that bigger picture for individuals. We want to make sure that it's agile, that we're not always giving someone a postcard with Wonder Woman on it, that we're changing up the ways that we recognize people. When I say relevant, we're talking about appreciating individuals in the way they like to be appreciated. Some people hate public recognition. So you don't want to publicly recognize someone if they don't appreciate that. Thank you notes for some people, like me, very meaningful. For other people, it doesn't mean anything. Something that I did with all the teams that I led was I had them fill out a survey. What are specific ways that you would like to be appreciated, that you like to be recognized? What are ways that you don't, that aren't as valuable when it comes to recognition? And then using that information so that I could tailor appreciation across the team. And we actually shared that document with the whole team. So it wasn't just about the direct leader recognizing staff, it was also peers being able to tailor their recognition to each other. And Julie, I love that research. The 5 languages of appreciation, it is a great resource. That's one of the things that I did with my last team. We read the book, did the survey, and then we shared our different languages of appreciation, added it to that document that we had so we could customize and tailor a recognition even more. And then lastly, that we're not waiting too long to appreciate people. If I just saw this fantastic presentation that someone did, and I'm not meeting with them for another week or 10 days, I'm not going to wait to appreciate them. I'm going to send them a note. I might also appreciate them in that one-to-one conversation, but I don't want to wait too long. I like to do it that same day or within a day if possible. So we want to make sure that it's timely. And mark your calendar. My best tip for ensuring that you're recognizing people regularly is having something marked on your calendar at least once a week or marked in your tasks. I had it as a task, a weekly task, to make sure that I am appreciating or recognizing at least one person a week. So have that reminder for you. There is a engagement question on the Gallup survey around recognition. It's something like, have I received recognition in the last 7 days? Because what they found is when employees feel recognized, they feel appreciated, they feel valued, they're more engaged. And we know based on tons of research that the more engaged employees are, the more productive they are, the better performers, the better results that we're going to see in the end. Oh, and I love it, Rebecca, that you do the same. Okay, so speaking of calendars and marking your calendars, March 7th is Employee Appreciation Day. So if this is something that you weren't already aware of, take some time, write some thank you notes, prep something behind the scenes, a way to appreciate the people on your team. This is a great opportunity to celebrate. And a couple other things that I'll mention besides just marking your calendar, infuse opportunities to recognize people wherever you can. Make it a standing agenda item in your team meetings, or make it a standing agenda item in your one-to-one conversations so that your employees always walking away from that one-to-one with some kind of recognition as well. So building it into your workflow is another way to make it more of a habit. So that's about recognition. When it comes to giving feedback, there are great frameworks available, and I'll share a few of those models with you that I like. But before I do that, I want to share the most important piece of giving constructive feedback. It's before you even have the conversation. It is all about your intent. There is this concept that I learned about with crucial conversations. I don't know if you're familiar with the crucial conversations model, but there's a concept in that model that talks about starting with heart, making sure that you have healthy motives before you get into the conversation. It is not as much about what you say as it is about how you say it. Now, both are important, but your intention, it speaks louder than your words. So asking yourself this question before you give feedback to someone, what is my intent? Is my intent to punish, blame, shame, be right, win the conversation? Or is it to support their growth, to help them improve, create a great experience for customers? So we really want to ensure that we have that healthy intent before going into the conversation. Now, Jonathan, I think I see a question. I want to make sure that I take a pause and address that. How do you avoid appreciation fatigue, where employees feel they're just being arbitrarily recognized to make them feel better? Yeah, so this is where the agile piece and the relevant piece are so important. Probably the relevant piece is the most important, ensuring that we are appreciating individuals in a way that actually matters to them, that it's valuable to them. So understanding that first, I think, is so important. If other people have ideas for Jonathan, please go ahead and drop those in the chat, and we can revisit this, Jonathan, at the end if you want some more ideas around that. But I would say that's the place to start, is just make sure that the way people are being appreciated is something that they actually value. So some frameworks that I want to share with you. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around the frameworks because, again, I think that intent piece is so important, but I do want to introduce a few that I have found really helpful in my experience leading teams and coaching and teaching other groups about feedback. So I'd mentioned the crucial conversations model. They have something that's a little bit more targeted to constructive feedback called crucial accountability. So it's a slight it's slightly different than the crucial conversations model. And the basic premise, the outline of this model is here is what I observed, focusing on the facts, specific things that you saw or heard. Here are the expectations, and here's the gap. So presenting that to the individual and then opening up the conversation for their perspective on the situation, their thoughts, what's been their experience with this gap. That's one model that you can use. There's a book, there's classes around that model. Another one that many of you might have heard of is from Kim Scott. It's Radical Candor. And this really provides a framework for giving direct, honest feedback while still demonstrating care for the person that you're giving feedback to. It's that really great balance between being specific, sincere, and kind when you deliver both praise and criticism. It's you really just finding that balance between being too soft and too harsh, which I know was some of the challenges that popped up when you all registered. So I really like this model. I think it's very simple. She's got lots of resources on her website, and she has a book as well. One thing I will mention about this model that when I read the book, I thought was fascinating. She said, out of all of these quadrants that you see in the visual, the worst one that we could do is ruinous empathy, where we care personally for the individual and we say, you know what, I don't want to hurt your feelings, so I'm not going to say anything at all. Because what she says is with obnoxious aggression, it's awful. It can really damage relationships, but it's at least out on the table. You at least know that the feedback, the feelings, the perceptions exist. With ruinous empathy, we don't know that. So you're not really being kind and giving the person an opportunity to grow in that space. So I always thought that that was pretty fascinating, and I wanted to share that with you. Now, this last model, this is a older model that was probably the first one I was introduced to when I first started being a leader 15 years ago, SBI. This is sharing the situation, what happened, what was the behavior that I observed, and what was the impact on me? What was the impact on the team? What was the impact on the organization? So you start off by sharing specific kind of setting up the context for the situation. Last week, during our team meeting, when we were discussing the project deadline, then you share the behavior that you observed. You interrupted several team members when they were sharing their updates, and you raised your voice to express your frustration. And then you share that impact, the impact that behavior had on you, the team, or the project. As a result, some team members stopped sharing their feedback, and the meeting, it felt less productive to me. It made it difficult for us to continue to explore solutions together. So if you haven't had a lot of experience with giving feedback, you haven't been introduced to a lot of models, I think this one is the easiest to start off with. But again, most importantly, work on that intent. Start with healthy intentions, healthy motives. Choose a model that works for you. Crafting the message, I think, is the easy part. It's the intention that really gets us into trouble. And here's my best tip that I can offer when it comes to feedback. Ask them to self-reflect first. How do you think it went? How do you think the presentation went? What's something you thought you did well? Any areas you would do different next time? How do you think that meeting went? How do you think that customer interaction went? So you're opening the floor for them to share their feedback first. Now, this is not going to work in every situation, but I've used it in a lot of interactions, and 9 times out of 10, the individual says what you were planning to say anyways. And then you can just validate, add your own perspective, and work collaboratively together on solutions for moving forward. So that's something that I've used, and I highly recommend. If it makes sense in a situation, ask for their feedback first and then add your own. Any questions about any of those models or any of the tips that I went over around giving feedback? Yeah, so Peter says, well, what if they don't share? Then you go back to one of those models and you share, here's what I observed, here was the expectation, here was the gap, or here was the situation, here's the behavior I observed, and here's the impact. So you would use the same process that you would use before. You're just not, you've given them an opportunity, they didn't give you the information or they disagreed with you, and then you're going to share your perspective. I hope that helps. Great. Any other questions? Okay. And I'll leave some space at the end for questions as well. The last piece that I want to talk about, I would love to hear is building your receiving feedback skill. Is that a part of anyone's conversation at your organization? Say yes or no in the chat. Is that something you've worked on, talked about, built the skill as a leader? Mixture. Yes, no, yes, no. Yes, but a ways to go. Oh, I love that it's part of the manager training program, Rebecca. It was not something that has been part of the focus for leaders at most of the organizations that I've worked with. It was only in the last probably 5 years that I was even introduced to the idea of building your receiving feedback skills. And I love the idea behind this. I want us to see more of this in organizations because providing education on giving feedback, it is important, it can help, but it's not going to solve the problem alone. It's the receiver that decides what they're going to let in, what they're going to make of the feedback, and whether and how they choose to change as a result of it. So, what I've learned in this research that I'm going to share with you, this is a great book I highly recommend, is that the power really lies within the receiver. So, if we're going to create this feedback culture, we need to focus not just on the giving feedback piece, but we also need to focus on building our skills around receiving feedback. So, this is the best source I've found so far. If you have other sources around receiving feedback that you love, books, research, please go ahead and drop those in the chat as well. This book, researchers Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen wrote Thanks for the Feedback, and they had been providing education around giving feedback for years, and they really weren't seeing the transformation that they were hoping for. And so they said, well, let's flip it and let's look at receiving feedback and figure out ways that we can help people build this skill. What strategies can people do to receive feedback more effectively, more productively, so that we're really looking at the full picture. And I want you to think about this for yourself. Think about a time when you're in your life when you received feedback that you didn't take. What was the reason why you didn't take that feedback? Was it because you didn't believe it? You didn't trust the source? It didn't seem fair? It was unproductive? It was vague? What were some of those reasons? Go ahead and post in the chat. What were some of the reasons why you didn't take that feedback? Yeah, didn't trust the person giving it? Yeah, perfectionism tendencies making us defensive. It felt out of context. Yeah. Didn't trust the person's intentions. Didn't take it at first because of the way that it was delivered. It wasn't delivered kindly. Funneled it through another person. Yeah. Unclear. Didn't feel like it was shared with my best interest. Just not ready to receive it. Got it too late. Oh, yes. When they tell you at performance review time and all of a sudden it's a surprise. Yeah, that's too late. It needs to be ongoing. Well, in their research, what they found was that we typically experience three triggers when we are receiving feedback. One of those triggers that comes up for us, one of those triggers that comes up for us is around truth. Is this something that is accurate? Or is this something that is unfair? It's not accurate. It's just not true. One is around relationships. Is this somebody that I really trust as a credible source? They haven't really treated me great in the past. So, how can I believe anything that they're saying? Or it could be an identity trigger that pops up for us, where it makes us question how we see ourselves or the stories that we tell about ourselves. So I'm going to go into a few strategies with each of these triggers that pop up for us and go into just a little bit more detail of how do I mitigate these when they come up. So the first one I mentioned, truth. This is when we say to ourselves, well, that's just wrong. There is nothing true about what you're saying to me. Initially reject the feedback and don't believe it. Well, in that case, there's three strategies that I'm going to share with you to help mitigate this one. And I'm going to tell you right now, this is not easy. This work is hard. It is an investment in yourself. So don't, again, try to take all of these on at once and recognize that this is a journey. It takes time. So the first strategy is to not initially accept or reject the feedback. I know, easier said than done. But as much as you can say, okay, I'm not going to accept this, I'm not going to reject this, I'm going to get curious. I'm going to ask some more questions. So I've just received the feedback that I'm not strategic enough. Okay, can you give me some specific examples of when you didn't think I was strategic enough? And can you also give me some examples of how you define strategic, what that looks like? Have I demonstrated any of that? So get curious, ask some more information, try to get more of the big picture. And then once you have more of that big picture, say to yourself, okay, what about this feedback is right? I might not agree with the whole thing, but what pieces can I take? What pieces can I pull from and continue to grow and continue to improve? The next trigger that I mentioned is all about relationship. So, this is when we dismiss the feedback because we don't trust the receiver. And there's usually two reasons why we don't trust them. It could be because we just don't think they're a credible source. Who are you to say this to me? You haven't worked in learning and development for the last decade, or you haven't worked in healthcare, or you haven't worked in HR, whatever your business is. You don't think that they have the expertise, or you don't think that they have positive intentions. You think they have unhealthy motives. The other thing that comes up is we don't like the way that they treat us. They don't appreciate us. They disrespect us. That doesn't feel like they accept me as a person. So that's what usually comes up when it comes to relationships. And the three strategies I'm going to share with you, the first one is to take a step back and say, what's the relationship issue? I know that I'm feeling a certain way about this feedback because of the person. So why is that? What is it that's bothering me? Where's the friction coming from? Separate that from the content of the feedback and have two separate conversations. So I'm separating the relationship issue from the content of the feedback, realizing I probably need to have two separate conversations around that. I'll focus on the content of the feedback, figuring out some more information, what might be right about that. And then I need to have a second conversation around this relationship friction that's happening. And then with the last trigger that tends to pop up for people, this is all around identity. This is challenging the story we tell ourselves about who we are, what our values are, what we're capable of, what we're like, what we're good at, what we stand for. It really it challenges the way that we see ourselves. It threatens our sense of identity and our sense of self-worth. So the first focused strategy for this is around regulating your emotional response. And this could be a whole nother workshop. There's a book that I always recommend to people. It's called The Illustrated Happiness Trap. I don't know if you can see this, but I'll share it in a follow-up email if it's something you're interested in. And I recommend the illustrated version because you probably can't see this, but it kind of reads like a comic book. There's all these thought bubbles and there's exercises in there, and it's all based on ACT therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. So all the exercises in here, and it is really about diffusing emotions, using emotions in a different way, not hiding them or tampering them down, really experiencing them, but experiencing them in a more effective way. So I think that's a great book that I always like to recommend to people that I work with. Growth mindset. So, leaning into a growth mindset that we talked about a little bit earlier is one of those strategies to help when this trigger pops up. So, instead of taking it on as a personal attack, which is our tendency when this trigger pops up, look at it as this is an opportunity for me to grow. It's not a personal attack, it's an opportunity for me to continue to grow, to continue to get better, to continue to improve. And then the last one is around strengthening our resilience, strengthening our ability to bounce back, strengthening our mental toughness. Again, that's probably a whole nother workshop that you could dig into, but practices around mindfulness and reflection can be really helpful with strengthening resiliency. So those three triggers, I really just wanted to do an introduction in case this is something that you haven't been as familiar with and give you some strategies. And I recorded this session so you can go back and look through those if you want to. As I was talking about those, did any pop up for you as, well, this happens to me all the time? This is the trigger that comes up for me when I'm receiving feedback. Go ahead and share it in the chat. Was there one that really stood out to you? Identity? Yeah. I know for me, when I first learned about this, it was more about relationship than either of the other ones. Truth, truth, same identity, ego gets in the way really fast, relationship. Yeah, so I'm seeing a mixture. And I think in certain conversations, we can hit all three of these as well. Relationship, seeing a couple people share. What can I learn from this? Yep, absolutely, Rebecca. And then do you ever witness one from other people? I know we have to make some assumptions and guesses in this, but I was just curious, is there one of these triggers that you see come up in other people? Go ahead and post that in the chat. Truth, identity, relationship. Yeah. So it kind of sounds like all of them, right? There isn't one that stands up that everybody experiences. It's quite a mixture depending on the individual. Shelby's sharing all. Yeah. So these are the three focus areas for truly building a feedback culture that is productive, effective, where you are recognizing people in meaningful ways, in ways that are really adding value to them, are motivating and inspiring them to continue to do great work. You're focusing on your intent first before giving feedback. Focus on that intent. It's so important. And you're better understanding your triggers and using the strategies to receive feedback more effectively in the future. That was a lot of information, and I meant to give you a menu of options, knowing that you have various challenges that you're dealing with on your teams and your organizations. So, based on those challenges, I hope you were able to come up with a tip, a strategy, something that you want to dig into a little bit more. I'd love to hear in the chat. What's your next step? Are you going to go read thanks for the feedback or mark your calendar to make sure that you're appreciating someone once a week? Are you going to get the 5 languages of appreciation book or look into one of the models for giving feedback that I mentioned to you? What do you want to do next? What's that first action or first step that you want to take? Plan to read thanks for the feedback, know your intent. It's so important. Others, what action do you want to take? Pull back up radical candor. Yeah. Radical candor, Elise, as well. Refreshing yourself on the model, sharing it with the team. Receive guidelines help to anticipate how your team may receive the feedback and proactive more accordingly. Yeah, Julie, that's a great point that I forgot to mention. Those skills, building your own skills in receiving feedback is really important. Understanding your own triggers from that perspective is so important. But also, as leaders, when you're giving feedback, understanding how people might receive that feedback can be really helpful in delivering it. So now, when somebody goes on the defensive, you know one of those triggers popped up. So maybe you didn't give enough information, right? It's that truth trigger and it was too vague. So, what's more specific examples that you can share with them? Or maybe it's a relationship trigger for them and you need to do some work with the relationship. If it's identity, taking a step back, ensuring that this isn't a personal attack on them, that it is really about setting them up for success, that you're there to support them. So, sharing your intent out loud. So, thank you for bringing that up, Julie. Radical candor refresher, Shelby's sharing, leaning into the relationship building, strengthening emotional intelligence to help receive feedback better. Yeah, always thinking about the worst case response, best case response, and then the most likely response and how I will respond so I'm ready. So doing some prep work is really important as well. Well, thank you for sharing those actions. I have a few goodies that I'm going to share in a follow-up email. So the receiving feedback, I have a one pager, all of those triggers that I went over, a description of what they mean, the strategies that I mentioned, I put that in a one pager for you. So I'm going to send that to the group. I'll also share that book that I recommended around regulating emotional response. That was a lot packed into a short period of time. So, if you're looking for more support in this space, you want to dig deeper into those three strategies that we discussed today, I'm offering a deeper dive workshop series this April. It starts April 15th. It's virtual, 3 90-minute sessions where we dive into those three areas a little bit more. And then we end with a 30-minute coaching session where we can tailor a specific action plan for you to take back and implement with your team and your organization. And then there's lots of resources and templates that'll be part of a toolkit that you can walk away with as well. So there's a QR code there. It'll take you to more information about that. I'll send it in a follow-up email as well. I have another free workshop coming up at the end of March, all around leading through uncertainty. And all the topics that I do on these workshops I've been offering monthly, they are tied to relevant topics that I've been working on with teams. These are coming up in coaching conversations, they're coming up in team conversations. So, leading through uncertainty is just a topic that I'm hearing a lot from individuals, from leaders, from teams. So, I want to provide some actions, some tips, some strategies. The QR code will take you to registering for that session. If you're interested, I'll send it in the email as well. And then my contact information. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not already connected. I post regularly leadership tips, strategies, lessons learned along the way, and stories. My email address is there if you want to contact me directly, and my website. And before I open it up to questions, I just want to remind everyone that this is a journey. We are all works in progress. Focus on the learning more and just getting a little bit better every day. So I hope I was able to provide you with at least one tip, one takeaway, something that you can implement back onto your team and organization. And with that, I want to create some space for questions that individuals might have. If you do have to hop up, I totally understand. Don't feel like you need to stay. So thank you if you are going to hop off. But for those that want to stay, want to dig into anything that I shared a little bit more, we have about 15 minutes and I'm happy to answer questions you have. And you can post the question in the chat. You can unmute yourself, whatever you prefer.
I have a question for you, Jen. So I feel like in my team, feedback is becoming more of a habit in terms of feedback to the folks that report to me and even feedback among themselves. Where I feel like I'm still struggling is building trust and comfort of my direct reports giving feedback to me without me first prompting it. So I'd love any tips you have, because I think it's part of a culture of feedback. Bi-directional, and some folks mentioned that in the chat, is so important. So I'd love any tips you have for that.
Yeah, so the first thing I'm going to say is be okay with that never happening. It just might
Okay.
not. It
Yeah.
just might not ever get to that point. I will say with the last team that I led, that I'd mentioned, feedback was great on the team. Some people were just more comfortable giving me direct feedback without prompting than not. And so I, as the leader, just made it a regular practice to build feedback conversations and ask for feedback constantly. And yes, it might feel like more work on our part, but the those power dynamics that exist, they're really hard to break down because of previous work experience, because of individuals' own experiences that they've had over time. You just might never be able to break that. So I wouldn't necessarily focus on that as the end game. I would focus more on you just building a healthy habit of constantly asking for feedback and appreciating the feedback that you get along the way.
It's helpful. And I think I do that in formal ways, but building the habit in more informal ways too will be helpful.
Yes, one thing that I did, for me, it's all about just building it into the practice. So I would have quarterly professional career development conversations with everyone on the team. And that's when I would make sure I always had some feedback questions for them. So I knew once a quarter at least I was making it a habit. I would send those questions to them ahead of time so they could think about it. That's really helpful in honoring people's different communication preferences. Some people want time to think about answers to those questions. And I tried to have examples too. Here's a time where I think I might have missed the market in supporting you, to just make it safer for people to say, oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. Or, yeah, you did miss the mark on that one. It just makes people feel more comfortable if you can have some prompts for them too.
The idea of examples. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Elise. Other questions, comments that anyone has around feedback or tips, things that you have found helpful when it comes to feedback?
I'll share one thing that I've learned over the years as a leader. I think it's easy for us, it's very natural for us to provide redirecting feedback because we notice it. It's like you have 100 apples and one is bad, and you focus on that. But I think it's very important to know as leaders that we should make a habit of even for looking for the reinforcing feedback that we can give because
Yeah,
that goes such a long way. I think the ratio it's a random ratio, but it's like 7 to 1. Like you should try and give that positive reinforcement rather than always looking for the redirecting. And
yeah.
it goes a long way in building that relationship and that trust too.
It's such a good point. We naturally look at the deficits. And I think
Hmm.
for a lot of us too, performance evaluations are kind of the structure around them is gap focused and deficit focused. It's not as much celebrating all the good and the wins. You're looking at the gaps. At least traditionally, that's performance evaluations as I've experienced it at a lot of organizations. I know places are trying to change that. It should be more strengths based, right? We're not ignoring the deficits and the gaps. We do want to focus in on them. We can't forget the good stuff. We can't forget the appreciation. And something I hear sometimes from leaders is, well, why should I appreciate them for doing their job? And I always follow up with, well, do you want them to continue doing their job? Because if you're not appreciating them for doing their job, they might not know where they stand, and you're going to devalue and demotivate them if you're not appreciating them for that. So it's just such a good important reminder.
Yeah, I think the more we do that, I think we don't realize the long-term impact of it is that, that sense of accomplishment and value that people feel. And then
Hmm.
you'll actually end up getting a lot more out of them than even they thought they could give you.
Yes, it's so true. Hey, Rebecca, I see your hand up.
Hey, can you hear me and see me?
I can.
Hey, so one thing that I was thinking of when you were talking about receiving feedback, there was a session we were doing at the place that I work in. I added in the phrase of like um, receiving it like it's a gift, and I just told the group, you may not want that gift. It's kind of like the white elephant thing where you get it and you're like, what am I going to do with this thing? And just shove it in the corner. But I said, just still keep it in the back pocket. So acknowledge it, thank them for it, because you never know when that gift might come in handy. So
Yeah.
that's just one thing that I think always sticks with me is if people give me feedback, there are times where I'm like, not relevant. Thanks for caring. Thanks for telling me something. And then all of a
Hmm.
sudden something down the road will happen. And I'm like, oh, you know what? That actually
Hmm.
was something. And so you just got to kind of hang on to it. So that was something I thought about when you were talking about the receiving feedback piece of things.
Yeah, some of the coaching I've given to people is just wear it. Just try it on. Like, if the
Sure.
feedback were true, what would that mean? So just
Hmm.
sit with it and try it on for a few days. And I think something else that when you said that came to the surface for me, we should feel how we feel about the feedback that we received, right? It's okay to receive feedback and not feel so great. So I think that's another piece that's really important when receiving feedback is giving ourselves space to feel what we feel, process
Hmm.
those emotions, and then respond. So even in the moment, if you're not ready to receive that feedback, let the person know. Thank you for the feedback. I need to sit with this for a couple of days. Is it okay if we circle back?
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rebecca.
Building on that quickly, I think sometimes as someone who needs to provide feedback a lot, specifically around visual design or copy, I'll
Hmm.
use that phrase, like a team will share work with me. Sometimes I have notes in the
Hmm.
moment, but
Hmm.
sometimes, rather than just like try to give them everything now in 5 minutes upon first look, that's not really fair either. So say, I'm going to sit with this for a little bit and I'll come back to you with like more constructive and actionable notes. Here's my top line thoughts.
Yeah, I love that. So not just giving yourself time for receiving feedback, but also giving yourself a little time to process giving feedback and how you want to give it in a way that is truly helpful and productive and effective. So thank you so much for sharing that, Marcus. Other questions, comments, thoughts that pop up for people around creating a positive culture of feedback? Well, I just want to thank you all for coming today, for engaging with me. I'll send out those goodies here shortly this afternoon. I'll send out the recording link as well if you want to go back to anything. I'm going to stay on the line for the next few minutes just in case there are any last questions. But again, just appreciate all of you being here today. Thank you.